Hey everyone, welcome back to Mimi Horror Stories. Tonight, we're bringing you another episode of spine-tingling horror tales set against the calming sound of rain. So, get comfortable, hit that like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. You know, I've driven down countless roads in my life, but nothing prepared me for what happened that night. It was late, probably around midnight, and I was driving through a rural area I wasn't familiar with. The road was narrow, surrounded by dense trees, and there wasn't a single street light to be seen. Just me, my car, and the darkness. I was low on gas, but figured I could make it to the next town. Of course, luck wasn't on my side. My car sputtered and finally died, right there in the middle of nowhere. The dashboard lights dimmed, leaving me in total darkness. I cursed under my breath, realizing I'd have to walk to find help. I grabbed my phone for light and started walking, hoping to find a gas station or at least a house where I could call for help. The road stretched on endlessly, and after what felt like miles, I finally spotted a small convenience store in the distance. It looked run down, but the lights were on, and that was all that mattered. I explained my situation to the old man behind the counter, who seemed a bit too eager to help. He handed me a gas can and wished me luck. I hurried back down the road, my breath fogging up in the cold night air. But when I got back to where I thought I'd left my car, there was nothing. No car, no sign of anything. Just an empty stretch of road. I stood there, dumbfounded. I was certain this was the spot, but my car was gone. I started walking further up the road, thinking maybe I'd misjudged the distance in the dark. But the road seemed different now. The trees, the bends, it all felt unfamiliar, as if I'd taken a wrong turn without realizing it. Panic began to set in as I realized I was completely alone, with no car, no road markers, and no idea where I was. I decided to retrace my steps to the convenience store, but the more I walked, the more disoriented I became. The road seemed to twist and turn in ways that didn't make sense. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw the faint glow of the store's sign in the distance. But when I reached the spot where the store should have been, there was nothing. Just an overgrown lot, as if the place had been abandoned for years. I was completely shaken. How could a whole store just disappear? I eventually made it to the main road and flagged down a passing car. The driver looked at me like I was crazy when I told him what happened, but he was kind enough to drive me to the nearest town. When I asked around about the convenience store, the locals told me it had burned down years ago, long before I could have possibly seen it. To this day, I can't explain what happened. My car was never found, and I still get chills thinking about that night. It was as if I'd stepped into another world for a brief moment, and when I came back, nothing was the same. You ever have one of those nights where everything just feels off? That's exactly what happened to me a couple of years ago, and to this day, can't shake the memory. I was driving home from a friend's house, and it was already late around AM. The road was completely deserted, just a long stretch of asphalt cutting through a forested area. I had this uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, but I chalked it up to being tired. Then, out of nowhere, my gas gauge suddenly dropped to empty. I mean, it was fine just minutes before. I cursed my luck as the car sputtered to a stop on the side of the road. There I was, stranded in the middle of nowhere, and my phone barely had a signal. I managed to get a text out to my friend, telling him what happened and asking if he could bring me some gas. He said he'd be there in about 30 minutes, so I just had to wait. That's when things got weird. At first, it was just a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned to look, but there was nothing there, just the trees swaying in the breeze. But then it happened again, and this time, I was sure I saw something. A shadow, darting across the road behind my car. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. After all, it was late, and I was alone in the dark. But the shadows kept moving, darting back and forth, getting closer to the car. I couldn't see anything making those shadows, no people, no animals, nothing. Just these dark, formless shapes creeping along the ground, sliding across the road, and circling the car like they were alive. I locked the doors and turned on the interior light, trying to calm myself down. But the shadows didn't stop. They seemed to be gathering around me, growing bolder, almost like they were curious about me, or worse, like they were hunting. I started to panic, my heart pounding in my chest. I kept checking the time, hoping my friend would show up soon. The minutes dragged by, and the shadows just kept moving, never taking shape, just shifting and swirling in the darkness. Then, finally, I saw headlights in the distance. My friend was coming. The moment those lights washed over the car, the shadows vanished. Just like that, they were gone, as if they'd never been there in the first place. When my friend pulled up, I practically jumped out of the car, shaking like a leaf. He asked what was wrong, but I couldn't even begin to explain what I'd just experienced. I just told him I needed to get out of there. We filled up the tank, and I got the hell out of that place as fast as I could. To this day, I have no idea what those shadows were, and I don't think I ever want to find out. All I know is that something was out there with me that night, and it wasn't just my imagination. I was driving through a rural area, way off the beaten path. It was one of those nights where the sky was pitch black, and the only light came from my headlights cutting through the dark. I hadn't seen another car for miles, just endless fields and the occasional farmhouse in the distance. As luck would have it, my gas gauge suddenly dropped to empty. I was miles from the nearest town, so I had no choice but to pull over and hope for the best. I turned off the engine and tried to calm myself down, thinking about who I could call for help. That's when I saw something movement in the field to my right. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer, but as I squinted into the darkness, I realized it was a child, a little boy, no older than 6 or 7, walking towards my car. His clothes were old-fashioned, like something out of a photo from the early 1900s. He came up to my window, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Mister," he said, his voice trembling, "can you help me? I'm lost." My heart sank. What was a kid doing out here alone in the middle of the night? I couldn't just leave him there. I got out of the car and crouched down to his level, trying to reassure him. "Hey, it's okay. Where are your parents? Do you know where you live?" He shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "I can't find my way home," he whispered. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I forced a smile and told him we'd figure it out together. I reached out to take his hand, but the moment I did, he was gone. Just like that, he vanished into thin air, right in front of me. One second, he was there, and the next, I was standing alone by my car, my hand grasping at nothing but empty air. I stumbled back, my mind racing to make sense of what just happened. There was no trace of him, no footprints, no rustling in the nearby fields, nothing. It was like he had never been there at all. I scrambled back into my car, locking the doors and trying to catch my breath. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't know what I had just seen, but I knew I had to get out of there. Miraculously, the engine sputtered to life when I turned the key. Despite the empty gas tank, I didn't question it. I floored it, speeding away from that place as fast as I could, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. When I finally reached the next town, I asked around about any missing children, but no one knew anything. There hadn't been a child reported missing in that area for decades. The locals, however, weren't surprised when I described the boy. They told me stories of a child who had gone missing nearly a century ago, wandering off from his home and never found. Some say his spirit still roams those fields, looking for someone to help him find his way home. And I guess, on that night, he thought I could be the one. You ever have one of those encounters that just sticks with you, like a shadow that follows you around, no matter how hard you try to shake it? This is one of those stories, and I still get chills every time I think about it. It was late, probably around PM, and I was driving through a remote part of the countryside, the kind of place where the roads twist and turn without a single streetlight to guide you. I was low on gas, but convinced I could make it to the next town. As you can probably guess, I was wrong. My car started sputtering, and before I knew it, I was rolling to a stop on the side of the road, surrounded by nothing but darkness and the distant outline of trees. I tried restarting the engine a few times, but it was no use. I was out of gas, and my phone was barely holding onto a signal. I decided to get out and look around, hoping maybe I could spot a house or something nearby. That's when I saw him, an old man, standing a little ways down the road. I hadn't noticed him before, and it was odd because there hadn't been any cars passing by, and I was sure I was the only one out there. He was tall, with a weathered face, and wore old clothes that looked like they belonged in a different era. He was just standing there, staring at me, and I'll be honest, it freaked me out a bit. I waved at him, trying to keep my voice steady as I called out, "Hey there, car ran out of gas. Do you know if there's a gas station nearby?" The old man didn't move for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, he started walking toward me, his eyes never leaving mine. When he got close enough, I noticed his face was etched with lines of worry, his expression almost desperate. "You need to leave," he said in a voice that was firm but laced with fear. "Get out of here right now. Don't stay here any longer than you have to." I was taken aback. "What do you mean? I'm just waiting for a friend to bring me some gas." He shook his head, looking around as if expecting something or someone to show up any second. "This place isn't safe. People go missing around here. They're here one moment, and the next, they're just gone. Don't wait. Leave." I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to brush him off as just some eccentric old guy, but the urgency in his voice made me uneasy. I thanked him and watched as he turned and walked back down the road, disappearing into the darkness. My friend finally arrived with the gas can about 20 minutes later. I was anxious to leave, so we filled up the tank quickly, and I mentioned the old man's warning. My friend's face went pale. He'd grown up in the area and told me that stretch of road was notorious for strange disappearances. Over the years, several people had gone missing without a trace, and their vehicles were often found abandoned, much like mine had been. He told me that locals believe something evil lurks in those woods, something that takes people. The old man's warning echoed in my head, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I just narrowly escaped something terrible. As we drove away, I glanced back in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the old man standing there again. But there was nothing, just the darkness swallowing up the road behind us. I never drove down that road again, and every time I hear about someone going missing in the area, I think about that old man and the warning he gave me. Maybe he saved my life that night, or maybe he was something else entirely. All I know is, I listened, and I got out of there while I still could. Let me tell you about the night I stopped trusting time. It was supposed to be a simple drive, just a few hours to clear my head after a long day. I wasn't even worried when I noticed my gas gauge dipping toward empty. I figured I'd stop at the next station and fill up. But then, the needle dropped faster than I expected, and before I knew it, my car was sputtering to a stop on a deserted stretch of highway. I pulled over, cursing my luck, and checked my phone. No signal. Typical. It was the middle of nowhere, no lights, no houses, just an endless road surrounded by trees that seemed to close in around me. I wasn't scared, not yet anyway. I dealt with worse situations. I figured I'd wait a bit, maybe someone would pass by, or the signal would come back, and I could call for help. I checked my watch, 1:15 a.m. Ideal, but I'd get through it. I leaned back in my seat, trying to get comfortable, and watched the minutes tick by. 1:20, 1:30, still no cars, no lights on the horizon. The night was dead silent, the kind of silence that presses in on you, making you hyper-aware of every little noise your own body makes. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I knew, I was jerking awake, heart pounding like I'd just had a nightmare I couldn't remember. My first thought was to check the time too. 4:45 a.m. Only an hour and a half had passed, but something felt off. The air was thick, heavy, like a storm was brewing, but the sky was clear. I sat there, trying to shake off the strange feeling creeping over me. My phone was still dead, no signal, and the road was as empty as before. I couldn't remember falling asleep, and worse, I couldn't shake the sense that I'd been somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't quite recall. Suddenly, headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the darkness. Relief washed over me as a car pulled up behind mine. A guy stepped out, looking concerned. He offered me a ride to the nearest gas station, and I jumped at the chance to get out of there. As we drove, I noticed the sky starting to lighten. Dawn was breaking. I glanced at my watch again, confused. It read 2:50 a.m. Oh wait, the sun was rising, but according to my watch, only 5 minutes had passed since I last checked. I asked the guy what time it was, and he said it was nearly a.m. My heart skipped a beat. How could that be? I checked my watch again, but it still showed the same time. The guy must have noticed the panic on my face, because he asked if I was alright. I just nodded, too freaked out to say anything. I couldn't remember the last few hours. Yet here I was, watching the sunrise like I'd lost a chunk of time. When we got to the gas station, I filled up, thanked the guy, and headed home. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. The missing hours, the eerie silence, the way the night had seemed to swallow me whole. I took my watch to a jeweler the next day, thinking it was broken, but they said it was perfectly fine, ticking away like it should. But I know what I saw. Somehow, I lost nearly 4 hours of my life that night, and to this day, I have no idea where they went. Whenever I drive at night now, I can't help but glance at the clock, half expecting time to slip away from me again. I still don't know what happened out there. But one thing's for sure, time isn't always what it seems. And sometimes, it's better not to know what you might find in those missing minutes. Alright, so let me tell you about the night I swore off driving alone on deserted roads. It was one of those nights where nothing seemed to go right. I was driving back from a long trip, exhausted, and of course, I didn't pay attention to the gas gauge. I figured I'd make it to the next town before refueling, but my car had other plans. The engine sputtered, and just like that, I was coasting to a stop in the middle of nowhere. I pulled over, cursing my luck. The road was completely deserted, not a single car in sight. Just a stretch of highway cutting through dense, shadowy woods. My phone had no signal, and there wasn't a gas station for miles. I sat there for a minute, trying to decide what to do, when I noticed something up ahead, a pair of taillights, faint but unmistakable, glowing through the darkness. Relief washed over me. I wasn't alone out here after all. Maybe whoever was in that car could help. I grabbed my flashlight, got out of the car, and started walking toward the other vehicle. As I got closer, though, something felt off. The car didn't seem right. It was sitting at an odd angle, like it had been abandoned in a hurry. When I finally reached it, I shone my flashlight through the windows, expecting to see someone inside. But the car was empty, completely empty. No sign of life, not even a bag or a jacket left behind. And that's when I noticed the dust. The car was covered in a thick layer of dust, like it hadn't been touched in years. The windows were grimy, the paint was dull, and the tires were half deflated, sunken into the cracked pavement. It didn't make sense. How could a car that looked like it had been sitting there for ages still have its taillights on? I circled the car, shining my light around, trying to find any clue as to what had happened. But there was nothing. No footprints, no signs of recent activity, just that eerie, abandoned vehicle sitting in the middle of the road. A chill ran down my spine, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something about the whole situation just felt wrong, like I had stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see. I thought about knocking on the windows, calling out, but something in my gut told me to leave it alone. I backed away slowly, keeping my flashlight trained on the car, half expecting someone or something to appear out of the darkness. But nothing did. The night was silent, save for the sound of my own footsteps crunching on the gravel. When I got back to my car, I locked the doors, my heart pounding in my chest. I kept staring at those taillights in the distance, wondering how a car could look like it had been abandoned for years, yet still have power running through it. I tried to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was watching me from the shadows. Eventually, another car came by, and the driver was kind enough to give me a lift to the nearest gas station. But when we drove back to my car with the gas can, the other vehicle was gone. Just like that, it had vanished, leaving no trace behind. No tire marks, no signs it had ever been there. To this day, I can't explain what I saw. I've heard stories about phantom cars and ghostly apparitions, but I never believed in any of that until that night. Now, every time I drive down a dark, empty road, I can't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those taillights again, glowing faintly in the distance. But whatever I saw or didn't see that night, I'm not eager to cross paths with it again. Let me tell you about the most unsettling night I've ever experienced. It was supposed to be a simple drive back from a weekend getaway. I was on this long, lonely stretch of road, surrounded by nothing but fields and the occasional stand of trees. I had been pushing my luck with the gas gauge, thinking I could make it home without stopping, but of course, I was wrong. My car gave a final sputter and came to a stop in the middle of nowhere. At first, I wasn't too worried. It was late, but I had a full tank of patience and a phone with a signal at least. That's what I thought. I pulled over, shut off the engine, and tried calling for a tow truck. The operator assured me they'd send someone out as soon as possible. So, I settled in and waited. That's when the wind started to pick up. It was one of those eerie winds that seems to carry whispers with it, like it's alive. I sat there, the darkness pressing in from all sides. When I first heard it, a soft, disembodied whisper carried on the breeze. It was faint, but clear enough to make out. "Sarah." I froze. My name is Sarah, but I was the only one out here. I looked around, trying to figure out where the voice was coming from, but there was nothing, just the rustling of leaves and the distant howl of the wind. I thought maybe I was imagining things, so I tried to ignore it. But the whispers kept coming. They grew louder and more insistent. "Sarah, come closer." It was as if the wind itself was speaking directly to me, and each time, it sounded more urgent, almost desperate. I started to feel this creeping sense of dread, like I was being watched. My heart was pounding, and I was scanning the darkness, half expecting to see someone or something emerging from the shadows. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just the wind playing tricks on me. The minutes dragged by, and the whispers grew more frantic. "Sarah, help us." It was almost as if the voices were pleading with me. I could feel my nerves fraying, the tension becoming unbearable. I kept telling myself that it was just my imagination, that I was exhausted and scared. Just when the whispers reached a fever pitch, the sound of headlights pierced the darkness. Relief washed over me as the tow truck pulled up beside my car. The driver got out, and the whispers stopped as abruptly as they had begun. The wind fell silent, leaving only the hum of the truck's engine and the clink of tools as the driver went to work. I didn't say anything to the tow truck driver. I was too shaken to talk, and I didn't want to sound crazy. We got my car sorted out and headed back to town. The entire drive was eerily quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been waiting for me to leave. I still drive that stretch of road occasionally, but I can't help but feel uneasy whenever the wind picks up. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I think I hear a whisper or two carried on the breeze, calling out, just like before. It's probably nothing, just the wind and my overactive imagination, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm still being watched. And I wonder if those voices were trying to warn me about something, or if they were calling me to something far more sinister.